To everybody, to brothers and sisters, to everybody in the room. It is an absolute delight and an honour to have you here once again. We are DELE, as his unmitigated brilliance, once again assembles us into a room for us to actually get watered by his beautiful mind, by his cashmere thoughts also, and by everything they've brought to the table too for us for a very, very long time. I welcome you all, and I thank you all for coming. And I think sometimes I'm going to take you all to the black church for a moment. Can we turn to our neighbours? Can everybody turn to a neighbour and say, welcome. It is very good to see you. Good. So I'm not going to go all TD Jakes tonight, so I'm going to keep this very, very simple. I'm just going to say that look, this is a beautiful evening, a beautiful event. CULPRITS brings us here tonight. I believe I was there for a slave ship called Jesus, or so, for the launch of that, and I believe it was a slave ship called Jesus, or it was the lawyers, the law and the lawless, or so. So DELE is somebody who has brought so much to the table, who is a man of unmitigated integrity and absolute intellectual curiosity, and has done so much time and time again to unearth details, to unearth facts, to unearth key information, to paint the full picture of the history of not just Nigerian people, but of Africans and wherever they be, those of us who were lucky to escape or to have not been subject to the horrors of enslavement, to those of us who were. So we are extremely and absolutely grateful to him. CULPRITS. A round of applause for him and all the rest. So, culprits. There is a man of words, a man of language. He doesn't pick words lightly. Culprits suggest that a crime has been committed. Now, we talk about the founding of Nigeria. We're going to come to this. We're going to dive into this quite deeply tonight. But I'm going to wind up what I'm about to say right now. But we're going to speak about CULPRITS in a lot of detail. I'm going to have a Q&A with DELE as the evening goes on. You're going to hear from lots of brilliant speakers or so. But I just want to welcome you all once again. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for staying. And I guarantee you're going to have a very, very enlightening evening tonight, as always. So, and all of you, of course, there's copies of all of DELE's books at the back. You should all make sure you get copies of them. But let's get into the show. We're here for the show, aren't we? Because this is one thing I must be clear about. That this is the House of Parliament when somebody says something crazy. So that's what we are a room of energy here. So, and we're not here for a monologue. So it's not just one, we're not going to speak to you from the stage. We're here for a dialogue. So we want to hear from you as much as we want you to hear us. So if you have something to say, or you want to say something or so, just let it be known. Put your hands up, stand up, explain, do something, express your outrage. But what's interesting, what's most important tonight, is that we all leave here more informed, more DELE Ogunified than when we came in here before previously. So without further ado, I'm going to now, so once again, welcome all to the launch of CULPRITS, and without further ado, we're going to play a video from Justin Glass, who is the editor of CULPRITS. Thank you very much.
Good evening all, my name is Justin Glass, I'm the editor of CULPRITS, and delighted at least to be with you over the air or on the screen to describe what I felt about reading the book CULPRITS. I'll say firstly though that I was also the director of the European Atlantic Group, and which DELE Ogun spoke so presciently. This was in the year 2008 to 2010. He spoke shortly before President Kenneth Kaunda, and there were many Africa watchers in the audience at the time who felt that come the bright future, DELE Ogun would be there in the firmament. But now, the promise that we saw then with DELE Ogun, I think to some extent has been realised in his extraordinary reading and writing of the period and writing of the book, which details so much of the thinking in the echelons, the upper echelons of the British ruling establishment. Of course, it went to the foundation of the country we now know of as Nigeria, and there was so much in the book that was news to me. I mean, we knew about Joseph Chamberlain, but the degree to which his mercantile thinking permeated the policy of the rulers of Great Britain was quite an eye-opener. I mean, DELE OGUN has been very fair-minded. It's not just the British who were involved in the scramble for Africa, of course, and we know about the Congress of Berlin, but the British actually had a record that was probably better than many, and the people of England were amongst the first, possibly in the history of the world, to call an end to many of the real ills that afflicted the body politic and the thinking of people at the time. I mean, from Machiavelli onwards. But what DELE has done is painstakingly unpack the thinking and, in many places, very apt quotations he's produced of those rulers. What happened? Well, it's a part of the story that deserves to be told. He's one of the real sort of field breakers, the trailblazers of telling the story of what happened, which will be of value to future generations, who I hope will be fair-minded about how things have changed and how the geist of one and the zeitgeist of one era isn't that of another. But now we can see, and we have DELE's handbook for understanding what actually made the people do what they did, think what they did, and how they actually acted. I mean, the book deserves to be a complete classic. I'm sure it will be. And many, many congratulations to DELE for having written it. And for me, as an editor, it was an honour to be involved tangentially in this project.
Hear the references pouring in already right now, so here we go. So I think that bodes well. I think again, as exactly as Justin and Glass just pointed out, DELE's work enriches you. When you read it, when you learn from it also, when you take it on board, you will walk away from there much better than you were previously. Justin mentioned the Berlin conference too, which I think I should have mentioned in my welcoming comments. We stand here, as we sit here right now, 140 years ago, in something that I think is actually one of the most audacious conspiracies of all time, and it was a conspiracy, it was an assault against the Africans. European powers met in a room. I don't know what the room looks like to this day, but they met in a room to discuss how they would divide Africa up amongst themselves. And they did. They did just that. And that's pretty much it. And with the backdrop of that knowledge 140 years ago, we meet here today to launch CULPRITS, of course, which is absolutely essential to that story. So we're learning about how, so CULPRITS teaches us how we actually got, so how they went from that meeting, the planning phase of it also, from what we today call a Nigeria perspective, to the absolute execution. So if those of you who were able to pay attention to the to the podcast that was played earlier on, it was fascinating just hearing some of the details that are coming out of it. So I can't wait to sink my teeth into it even further. Without further ado, I must welcome. So modesty is a quality of modesty is such a quality that sometimes some people really want to lean into it, and I don't know. I really think it's important that people be as arrogant as they've been blessed to do. So I think it was Winston Churchill who said that he's a very modest man with a lot to be modest about. Well, I'm about to introduce somebody who has nothing to be modest about whatsoever. Coming up next is Professor, and always when you ever meet academics, they always say, just call me by my name, I don't need to call Professor. But the moment you call it Professor, they love it. So please welcome Professor Penelope Caulfield. I know Professor Caulfield, she doesn't want me to tell you this, but she's from the Royal Holloway University, of course, the Royal Holloway, British Party University of London, and she is the professor of 18th century British history at Birkbeck, and the author of the Georges, and the chair of the 1833 commemoration group. in addition to being a member of the distinguished White Friars Club too. So there we go. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, I am a professor and I shall be marking your homework. I am a friend of Dele's, and our shared interest is our shared interest in history. That is really the basis of our friendship. I haven't read the book, but I'm going to tell you my 3 reasons why you should all be looking forward to reading it and why I am myself. And the first is, and this has already been mentioned, so it's a clear attribute, but as soon as I met Dele, I realized this is someone with a penetrating intellect, someone who could see into the heart of things, and that's a very great quality. It must make him a formidable lawyer, by the way, but it's a great quality for a historian as well. But then the second one is that Dele is also not afraid to tell the world of what he finds. Now, there are some people with penetrating intellects who don't go and tell the world, and there are other people who tell the world their views and don't have penetrating intellects. I'm sure you've all been caught up in pubs by pub bores or parties when someone corners you, or actually at political meetings. I've been active in politics all my life, and people stand up and prate away. So it's very important that Dele has a penetrating intellect, and he's not afraid to tell the world of what he's finding. And that's a very great combination, telling it like it is. But then the third related point is that he takes history seriously as a big, complex and vital component to all our knowledge of ourselves and the world we live in. And there are some people who say history, when it's long ago and far away and doesn't affect us, or it's meaningless, or it's so complex that we can't say anything. And, you know, it is complex, and bits of it are long ago and far away, but other bits are really up close and personal. And there's no clear dividing line between the past and present. When we all met half an hour ago, that's now in the past. We're just seamlessly, we're in history, we're of history, we're making history, and we should be thinking about history. And Dele is encouraging us to do that. And he's not saying everything in the past is bad, or everything is good, or everything is so complicated. He's looking at it closely, analysing it, debating it. And I'm sure he'll be glad, once you've come around to read the book, and I should be doing this too once I've read the book, go and argue with him about it, argue with your friends about it, argue with me about it. It is part of the dialectic of knowledge that we explore, we debate, and we develop. And in that sort of way, we can live in time. We're not just marooned in our own moment, we live in an unfolding experience, complex, but it's the whole nature of life, it's what we do. So the subtext of this book, the title is CULPRITS, which of course does suggest a legal analysis of things, you know, of villains, of things that have gone wrong, but the subtext of this is also hope. That we can understand what has happened, we can analyse it, we can develop it, and of course, therefore, we can change things. And you have to understand what has happened to change. So, while this book is called CULPRITS, please, when you read it, remember the subtext is hope, and let's all go out and change the world.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you so much. Thank you. As I said, she has nothing to be modest about, and you can see exactly why I said that. So thank you so much, and shout out to everybody from the White Friars Club tonight. So really, give yourself a big round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters of all genders, and known as my Gen Z brothers and sisters, always reinforcing that, I must say. Also, and I think it's important that I do be very inclusive. This is again, so we are here tonight, united to speak, to hear the words of, to heed the words of DELE OGUN. And without further ado, we're actually going to get the opportunity to hear Dele speak for a while, to hear his speech. Then after that, we will then come and have a discussion between him and I in the Q&A. So without further ado, please welcome the man of the evening, DELE OGUN.
Well, it was all too serious. All this DELE OGUN is this and DELE OGUN is that. And I know that there are people in the audience here who say, I know the real DELE OGUN. And I know that they were waiting for an opportunity to shame me. And so that the real guy is a very unserious character. Can I first check that you can hear me at the back? That's reassuring. There was the last time I asked that question on a speaking occasion like this, the answer that I got back was not what I expected. The old geezer said, yes, I can hear you, but I'll gladly swap places with somebody who can't hear you. So it's a question that I always ask with caution, especially when you have Britons and English men in the audience. After a few beers, you can't be sure what's going to come back at you. But it's a great delight to see you all this evening. This is a wonderful, wonderful occasion. And I should start by giving acknowledgements. Because the DELE OGUN story started with two people. My mother, Mrs. Regina Ayeyomi Oguntimuchu. See, that's the full version of the Ogun name. I made life easy for you guys saying DELE OGUN. She was the extrovert in the relationship, the speaker, the leader. And she was from a village not too far, deep in the rainforests of West Africa, from my father's village. It's actually walking distance. He was the introvert. He was the studious character. He was the wordsmith. And it's thanks to that combination of two opposites that you ended up with DELE OGUN standing here before you. They are represented by two people in this room. Well, I was never good at maths. There are three of us in this room. My sisters, one with red hair, the other one with white hair, but they do have an identity beyond their hair color. My sister, the last of us, because I'm the firstborn, the one and only, the only son, and there were three girls. The last of us is my sister Remy, who's going to take a short bow. They're more on the introverted side. She's going to stand up and take a short bow for recognition. The blonde at the back there, that's Remy. Woo! She followed me into the law. She's a solicitor. Lately she's discovered that she ought to have been a barrister. She'll tell you the story over a few drinks at the bar. It's a very recent revelation. Next to her is the first of the girls, Femi. And Femi is the redhead one who will take a bow. She's a town planner. But she's more than that, because she was part of the copy editing team for this book. She inherited my father's extreme attention to detail and master of the written word. So if the book you find it legible, it's a combination of the contribution of Justin Glass, who was the editor of the book, and my sister Femi, who's one of the two copy editors. The other of the copy editors is not here, but is well represented. And Bianca Tate is going to stand up and introduce our club. This is the Toastmasters Toastmaster, you've heard about the Whitefriars Club. Now you're going to hear about the other club that I belong to, the Toastmaster. Because the copy editor from the club was, of course, Richard. Yes, so Bianca, come along and tell them about the Early Bird Speakers Club.
Really put me on the spot.
I put you on the spot. You'll need a microphone here. Come along. Don't be shy, come. And while he's here, while Bianca's coming up, that's my son over there. Don't let him escape. That's young Demi. And outside, I think she's still outside, is my daughter Nike. Yeah.
You really name your son after yourself.
No.
Are you really that? Do you lack that much modesty?
I got. Demi means it's almost. Is it a Latin word, Matthew? It is. Sort of like half. Yeah, so it's not DELE, he's Demi. You know, half. Anyway, Bianca's going to tell you about the Early Bird Speakers Club. Come along, Bianca. A round of applause as we begin our.
Good evening, everyone. Anyway, the club is a fabulous place, and I do believe Professor Penelope's sister is a member of our club too, and I believe that's how you know Professor Penelope, isn't it? We have a fabulous public speaking club, and if you would like to join us, you would be most welcome. It is a very difficult place to leave. Now, when DELE came to the club, he told me he thought there was nothing more that he could learn. He'd already been standing up in a courtroom for many years, hadn't he? Hadn't you?
That's the story, yes.
It's the truth. But he learned even more. It has made him now a powerful, beyond words speaker. I'm looking at my club members and they're thinking, for God's sake, just get it off. I've had a drink. I'm not used to drinking. I thought I could relax. But our club is so special. We have some fantastic speakers. There is so much to be learned from our club. It's just marvellous. DELE, you put me on the spot. I will forgive you, but I'm handing the mic back now.
Thank you very much, Bianca. She told you all the nice things. What she didn't tell you is that we meet on Thursday mornings at the unearthly hour of 7 p.m. So, but if you find yourself sleepless on any particular Wednesday night, do come along to the club. Some, as she says, there's some great speaking experiences available.
Can we come and yawn?
You absolutely can. It's often done. It's often done. I thought that I should get it out there, the other side of the DELE OGUN story. But we're here for the book. And let me share with you the story behind this book. The ladies in the room will forgive me if I say that this is the nearest experience that I've had to pregnancy. Because do think about it, it starts with a small little thing. And it is nurtured and nourished daily, weekly, monthly. And the bits are beginning to join up slowly, progressively. And then you're looking forward to the day when you will give birth. And you will see that which you have been making along the way. Are you beginning to follow my analogy? And I think this is the reason why we have book launches. Because it is a lonely exercise sitting there with the books, the research, especially if you're writing works of history, works of non-fiction, the research that needs to be done, the writing that follows it, the editing, the proofreading, and even when you think it's all done and it's sent off to the typesetters, and then it comes back at you again, it's like, oh my gosh, can I bear to look at this thing one more time? But then the day comes. And the day came for Culprits. And it was yesterday that it was delivered, the first time that I saw my baby. And it looks so cute and looks so beautiful. And you do what you do to babies. Isn't that lovely? Isn't she lovely? Is that how the song went? Yeah. But this book has an older brother. The firstborn was the book Fatherless. The secret story of how the Nigerians missed the road to the promised land. That was published almost exactly 7 years ago. We had a launch event like this at Islington Town Hall. And initially my intention was to simply update the book, because the research continued and new information, new evidence was coming through. And I thought it needed to be expanded and updated. But then I remembered, first of all, Nigerians don't like reading at all. They certainly do not like reading long books. And they certainly do not like paying for books. And so the idea that having bought Fatherless, 320 odd pages, that I was going to expand it and then charge them again, it wasn't going to happen. But thankfully, I'm a bit of a schizophrenic. You see, those who know me, my sisters will confirm the story. I was born in Nigeria. And I came here at the age of 7. And that Nigerian side of me has never left. But from 1969 up until now, the British side of me started to unfold. And so here you have two characters in the one. My Nigerian side, my Nigerian identity. You saw a little bit of that as I was walking up to take the microphone. Just happy, funky people. And then the British side, a little more serious, a bit more, shall I use the word sober? I don't know if that's the right word.
Would you like our drink?
I know, that's why I was hesitating about sober. That might not be the word. But that's the other side of it. And so what I decided to do, rather than produce a larger version of a fatherless people, write a different story, but write it for the other side. So I switched the camera lens. So Culprits is the story of Nigeria, but I'm speaking to Janet, Professor Penelope Crawford. I'm speaking to my favourite barristers' chambers, ably represented by two of them here. Can I ask Matthew Wynne Smith of Counsel to Rise from Lab Chambers? And can I ask Tim, who I only met today, but no, we haven't met before. We haven't met before. Of Lab Chambers, best barristers' chambers on the planet. No, take it from me, because I'm fairly selective in terms of who I use. Because I'm confident that I could argue the case as well as anybody else. But because I want to release time for what I really enjoy doing, which is writing the books and teaching history, like Penelope Crawford, our professor, I have to find those who can run that leg of the race more effectively than I can. And I found them in Lamb Chambers, in particular with Matthew Wynne Smith. So if ever you have an issue in court and you say, I would love DELE to argue it, don't worry. If DELE can't do it, Matthew and now Tim, they will run with it. So I'm so glad that so many aspects of my life are represented in this group. And we mentioned very briefly earlier the Whitefriars Dining Club. But there's another aspect to it, because you get to meet so many interesting people. And one of the most interesting personalities that I met at Whitefriars was the secretary, the current secretary of the Whitefriars Dining Club. He was drinking, hoping that I won't mention it, but you know I will. Because he's my mentor as far as the publishing company is concerned. This is a man who shows you the ropes. Because you see, everybody needs a little helping hand from time to time. And one thing that I found amongst the British is that they are schizophrenic. They are the ones who are nice and good and very helpful and will share and will show you the way. That's how I started writing. I never intended to be a writer. It was a gentleman, John Coleman, who was a publisher. He owned a small company called New European Publications, who identified the writing gene in some of the articles that I had written and pushed me in that direction. And when it was coming to his end, because his children were not interested in his publishing work, he handed his company to me, New European Publications. But since his departure, his boots have been filled by the gentleman I'm going to ask to come up here and say a few words. Mr. Alex Galinsky. Yeah. Come on, Alex. And his lovely wife, Elizabeth, is right next to him. Keep the applause going as we do it first. Go and say a few words.
It's an honor to be here. I read DELE's first book, Fatherless, and just what Nels was saying, a new world opened to me. Something, I'm very interested in history, like you, Penelope, and a complete new world, not just a continent, but languages, nations, and a very rich history, which you made very graphic and very interesting to read. So I was only too glad to encourage you on the way to publishing with my little advice I can give you. That's all I can say.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. My printing costs were astronomical until Alex introduced me to the printers that he used. And initially, he allowed me to piggyback on his company until we established a relationship, direct relationship of our own with the publishers. You see, coming now to the book, CULPRITS. As I said, it's the history of Nigeria, but is actually the history of the world, but with Nigeria as the centerpiece. You see, because the empire was so great, so extensive, and it's the same team in the colonial office who are touching so many different parts of this globe. So as a result, you'll find that, perhaps unusually, there's an index of places, because if your country is not mentioned here, you probably ought to be, as Nell said, you're supposed to be the tribe rather than the security. We have, we have the Netherlands, Madagascar, Latvia. We even have, and you can go back and tell him at the club, we even have Lithuania. You know, Vidas, I think, will be very happy to discover that there's some connection between the Nigeria story and his obscure little country called Lithuania. It is a global book. It is a global book. Also, it is a retake on events that shape the world, but from an angle that you've never, I'm very confident in saying it, that you've never looked at it before. One of the favourite characters in the book, and I shall at this point just share a small reading to give you a flavour of what I'm saying. It is from the chapter titled A Special Relationship. You know that phrase, of course, special relationship between Britain and America. Each chapter opens with a quotation that defines what we're about to consider. Chapter 4, A Special Relationship. Churchill told me that he was not His Majesty's Prime Minister for the purpose of presiding over the dissolution of the British Empire. That was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, President of the United States of America. January the 21st, 1936, King George V dies. His dying words were, "How is the empire?" His son and heir, King Edward VIII, cared more for one Mrs. Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee in the middle of divorce proceedings against her second husband. The British monarchy had come a long way since the days of Henry Tudor, the only other sovereign to have worn the number 8 jersey. In the new age, a king could be forced by his subjects, at the instigation of the press and the Church of England, to choose between his kingdom and his intended. On December the 10th, 1936, Edward VIII made his choice. He chose Mrs. Simpson. He renounced the throne and all that came with it, including the British Empire. His younger brother, Albert, took over, becoming King George VI, and bringing his daughter, the future Queen Elizabeth II, onto the centre stage of world history, with Edward being relegated to the backstage of Duke of Windsor. Americans had broken free of the British monarchy when they declared their independence on July the 4th, 1776. Since that date, no reigning sovereign had set foot in the country. Did you know that? The visit of King George VI on June the 9th, 1939, to US President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a first. The break from tradition was a child of necessity. Churchill needed American help in the war with Nazi Germany, And the visit was part of his plan to bring America closer to Britain. Another child of the same necessity was the deployment of Pamela Churchill Harriman, the curvaceous, red-headed wife of Churchill's son, Randolph, on His Majesty's Secret Service. Her mission for king, country, and father-in-law was to bring the Americans into the war. Her prey was one of Roosevelt's envoys. Averell Harriman had arrived from America to take charge of the 42 billion, that's 600 billion in today's money, Lend-Lease military aid program, which Harry Hopkins had encouraged Roosevelt to implement. The seating arrangements at the dinner at Dorchester, in the middle of the Blitz, had been seen to by none other than Churchill's wife. Pamela, shimmering in a skin-tight, shoulderless gold lame dress, bought specially for the occasion by Lord Beaverbrook, secured a chair next to him in the private room on the 8th floor. By the time dessert was served, all was going according to plan. Pamela was well into what friends came to call her mating dance. Avery Harriman, her highly influential talent, and a man of stupendous wealth, was not adverse to action to cement the British and American relationship. As they watched Selfridge's department store succumbing to fire, Averell invited her to his palatial lower floor suite so we can talk a little easier. As the bombs whined and crashed, Averell was peeling off that gorgeous golden dress, while the building quivered from the worst rain in London to date and shrapnel rattled down onto the streets. Pamela lay naked in the arms of the man who might be able to bring the horror to an end. This was a strategic alliance of the highest order and would be vital to helping Winston in saving the country. But it amounted to much more than an act of seduction. Now, I was lucky to come across this book about Winston Churchill's daughter. It's called Kingmaker. I subscribe to Spectator magazine, and they have excellent book reviews. So as you can imagine, as I was approaching the end for Culprits, to come across that edition of the Spectator magazine, reviewing this book about Churchill's daughter-in-law, and this, Her Majesty's, or His Majesty's, Secret Service mission to seduce the US envoy in order to get America into the war. I was just rubbing my hands with glee. Reading on. The special relationship thus consummated was known to both principals, Churchill and Roosevelt. The latter took special delight in the development. Largely paralyzed below the waist from polio, the president still had a roving eye for beautiful women and relished saucy gossip. His cigarette aloft in a long holder at the corner of his mouth. Roosevelt got a big kick when Hopkins informed him about Pamela's affair with Averell. He was tickled by the idea of his emissary in London begging his ally stroke rival's daughter-in-law, and eager to know more. You see, power had shifted from the former colonial master to the former colonial subject. Now, we don't write history that way, do we? This is no history textbook. This is dramatic history. It's, I like to call the genre historical non-fiction. There are history textbooks. But I know that there's a great hunger and desire for people to understand the world that we live in. And so what I seek to do is to do the research from the textbooks and then tell the story with a different lens and perhaps with a little bit more Shakespearean drama and the occasional silky dress situations. It makes history so much more interesting. But there's a serious side to the book as well. You see, as Nelson mentioned earlier, the Berlin Conference is so fundamental to the world that we live in. Our whole continent, the continent of Africa, in the course of a 4-month conference, which started on the 15th of November, 1884, and concluded on the 26th of February, 1885, our whole continent was reconfigured and redesigned. This is where thousands of original ethnic groups that made up Africa on an organic basis were cancelled. We're all very familiar with the council terminology these days. Were cancelled. And in their place was constructed the entities that we now hear of, like Nigeria. And in the book, you'll see a linguistic map of Nigeria, which it just looks like if Bedlam could be reduced to graphics or in visual terms, that's what it looks like. 371 ethnic groups. Nelson speaks his language in Shekiri. I don't understand a word that he says. I speak Yoruba, he doesn't understand a word that I say. Worse still, my wife. There always comes a point when I have to do the proper thing and introduce her. The one who keeps the show on the road. The daughter of Biafra. Now, those of our generation, you will know the term Biafra. Where is she? She's in the room somewhere. Esther, let's just get at the back. Now, she deserves a huge round of applause, because you can imagine it's a terrible thing being married to me. Because with all the books that I read, who do you think I inflict my first thoughts upon whenever I come across anything that I want to tell the world? She's the one who just wants to watch her, I forget those Korean programs that she watches these days. What's the name of that program you're always watching? She's the one who gets it every single time that I've got this brainwave. I've got this idea. Can you believe what happened here? All the time. She has to suffer it. So I want to take the opportunity to acknowledge her and to thank her. I can see Samson. Madame slapped you around the head at that point and said, you see, that's how a good husband behaves. That's how a good man behaves. You must acknowledge it. I've been there, don't worry, I've been there. So, the serious dimension is that the confusion that is Africa, that this legacy, this heritage of conflict and poverty and suffering and all the rest of that, is the responsibility, we Africans didn't make it, but it's our responsibility to fix it. And the book is part of the process of taking responsibility. You can't solve a problem until you understand it. And in many of these countries, and I know Nigeria certainly, they do not teach the history. So the responsibility falls on those of us who write the books, who can do the research, to break it down for people so that they can understand, to give them a chance of being able to fix it. And so this is what this book is about. And I'm so glad that we have so many representatives of our host community here. The Britons, and I'm particularly delighted to mention a unique Briton. Yes, a unique one. Because she's an ancient Briton. Have you ever met an ancient Briton? Well, you're about to meet one. Come on up, Joe. Come on. Tell them why you're an ancient Briton. This is what an ancient Briton looks like. She's not ancient, but she's an ancient. You get my point.
Actually, I'm pretty ancient. I was born just after the Second World War. So my name's Jo Whelans, Wealleans. And for some reason in my life, it began to dawn on me that there's something different about the people of the north of England, Northumberland, where I grew up, different spirit, different way of looking at things. And at a certain point I began to try and look into our name. And best I could find out was that in the Irish language from which it comes, I don't know if that's Gaelic or not, it may be another Irish language, it means wolf, belong to the clan, which is somewhere close to tribe, and it bears the name Celtic. So in the course of having been promoted far beyond my right or ability to being a patron of the Fatherland Group, DELE asked me to come and say a few words at the opening of one of their events. And in the course of that, I began to look into the meaning of Celtic. And what did I find? I found out that if you look in certain dictionaries, where, by the way, I have often looked and failed to find words like Igbo, or Yoruba is usually in there, but Igbo for a long time was not. If you look in those type of dictionaries, like the Oxford English Dictionary, you will find that Celtic is said to mean barbarian. So this name I've been clutching to my chest and boasting about, I suddenly find I am labelled barbarian. You know, how dare they? Who did that? You know, and I'm not going to say much more about that, but I do want to say when DELE has conquered the world and everybody understands how we all benefit from what we're not really entitled to benefit from in the way that we do. I lost my thread now. I've gone too far into something and lost my thread. Oh, yes, back to the English language. It's a very important point. What we all, as thinkers and writers, have to be very, very wary of is this thing called the third person singular, and its relationship to empire and what we all suffer intellectually in seeking to describe the gross unfairness of the colonial empire. We have to be aware that what allows one, let's say, white English man, to speak universal truth is to stop saying I think and to say instead, it can be said therefore that. Time and time again, and this is a terrible trap for all of us intellectuals like myself. When I was in France in 1968, we were known as les sales intellectuels, the filthy intellectuals who weren't to be trusted at all, which is not a bad point of view, really. So, and there's a song in the 1960s as well that goes like this. The book you are reading is one man's opinion of moonlight. So remember, people, when you're writing, and DELE, I'm sure you're aware of this, and you don't write like this at all, on the whole. Be aware. And it's so
our news these days is so redolent of it. What we suffer in the NHS is redolent of this thing I'm talking about. And it's part of the reason why everything is known and nothing changes, because it's all transmogrified into this, it can be said that, you know. And it's a very defeating thing. So I'm going to stop there now, and thank you, Dave, for allowing me to ramble on.
Thank you, Joe. A true friend of the good. Now, you heard me mention Biafra once. At the heart of the Nigeria story is the tragedy of Biafra. And when you read this book, you will understand exactly why and how badly those people were treated. One of my heroes from Biafra is he around? Where's Mr. Boniuba? Is stand up and take a bow. The man who is in charge of all the graphics that you see there. This man works tirelessly for the cause, no reward. I can call him any time and say, Bonnie, I need this, and he just produces it back there. We can't thank you enough, Bonnie. You're a true soldier. True soldier. And while we're on that theme, I do want to call up another Biafran warrior, much closer to the actual story. He's my soul brother, my soul. His father played a very significant role in that war. We won't get into too much detail, but Timothy Modu Jr., he bears his father's name proudly. Can I call him up to just share a few words about this mission that our Fatherland Group is on? Tim.
I wasn't surprised when I started realizing people are called. I said, oh my God, I'm going to be a victim. But thank you, Dele. Two things I need to say. One is that I've known Dele for nearly 30 years. In fact, there's a name you mentioned here, and you've forgotten. One of our cases. Mr. Smith, you? I'm going to come and see you. I never knew.
Matthew Wilson.
Matthew, yes. You will not remember, but I'll tell you the story afterwards. We had a case, we did the kind of work we do, and a local authority took us on. And thought, well, this ethnic minority-led organizations, you can just deal with them. So I ran to my brother and said, he was our solicitor, said, look, we're going to get this sorted out. And he said, what's the story? Because then whenever I bring him out and say, Ted, stop giving me the information. I'm trying to find the basis in which I'm going to hang your case on. I've got enough data. Anyway, he called up and said, look, I know somebody who represents your interest. And we put things together, and I don't even think I've ever met Matthew. And he went and represented us in the High Court in Judicial Review. And before Matthew said a word, the council and everybody else gave up the power and said, we are wrong, you're right. So Matthew, this is the opportunity to say thank you. I know it's not the purpose here, but it struck me when you mentioned this, and then I turned around and said, Joe, is that not Matthew? So that's what Dele does to you. So he's now done the second thing and mentioned me and Biafra, you see. I was once called upon to speak about Biafra 50 years of Biafra, post-Biafra thing. And I just couldn't stomach going there. It was a BBC show. And we had I was to do the television interview, the BBC World Service. And they looked around and said, well, who else is there to speak about as a child, the experience of that, and also the fact that my father was kind of one of the leading people within the Biafra struggle. So I called Dele, I said, I can't do this. I really don't want to expose myself to the world, because if you're a Biafran, the truth is, it's the greatest secret you have to keep. Don't even mention to anybody about being a Biafran, because you will be killed or something not quite right. It was only just less than 10 years that truly any Igbo person will be publicly stand before the crowd and say, I am a Biafran, or I was during the heinous crime that happened in Nigeria. So you can imagine when BBC World Service called me to speak about Biafra, 50 years on, BBC World Service wanted them to tell the world about me, that everybody would pick me up. I wasn't brave enough to do that. So I called my brother Dele. I said, Dele, I don't know. He said, I'll go with you. And lo and behold, he joined me up. And we came to the BBC World Service and spoke to the television. But as soon as we were leaving the television session, the radio service turned around and said, we've just been listening to what you guys have been talking about, the Biafra 50. Well, you don't mind, just the next shift. I didn't realize that BBC World Service could actually shift the space. I said, can you come? There's a space for us to come in. So we went in there. But the most important thing, which is really very important for me to just mention here, was at that session, I was to experience, for the first time, I had to say my experience being a child during the Biafra War. Even after that speech, my mother, I called my mother later on and told my mother what I have to say. I never knew that I carried it. This is my wife, by the way, Edith. Yeah, I never knew that I carried this pain of my Biafran experience as a child, about 3 or 4 years old, so nursery. And I saw this, I remember it vividly, when people talk about the experience of Biafra. A helicopter landing to the school premises, shooting. I could see the pilot, I could see the gunman, right low, shooting indiscriminately at school. This injury stayed in my memory. I never revealed it to my mother until I said it in the BBC World Service. Shooting indiscriminately, I was crying. Everybody I thought was the end of my world. Every time I think of it, in fact that day I was crying at the BBC. Anyway, I had to save that experience, and that moment in time was when I realized, oh my God, this thing about Biafra, I was just lucky to actually live to tell this story. And even my own mother was hearing it for the first time. I couldn't even say. And so when we talk about Biafra and experience of it, and I hear what's going on in Palestine and everywhere else, I was sent to say to people, the people of Igbo people have actually had an incredible, unforgettable memory of genocide of the highest order. That's why when Dele was writing the culprits, we belong to history group. Today I was really putting into that history group. I said to Dele, you're just giving us the ammunition, condolences to anybody who now takes us down, because we've got a weapon to now look and begin to unlearn, to relearn what we're supposed to learn. Thank you, Dele.
Oh, these Nigerians are so good, aren't they? I can say on their behalf. Don't you agree, early bird speakers? These Nigerians are something else. See, we're here to show the other side of the Nigerian story. We've heard and no criticism of the media establishment generally. It's just that the system that was put in place, that was left behind, this is what the book exposes, the political order and structure that was left behind, has allowed the worst of us to run the show, when the best of us are just moaning between ourselves, wringing our hands. But the fight back begins because we now understand what happened. We know the culprits. We know who did what. I do want you guys to interact, so we're going to have a session now to get some questions from the floor. There will probably be some questions. And then, we're going to go up there, Nelson and I, and you can fire questions at us. I think we've only got 2 mics, haven't we? So we're going to leave, we've got a roving mic there, good. So,
I'll take some.
yeah, so I've got mine. Yes. And then once we wind up the Q&A session, then we can get back to networking again and meet some interesting people. Oh, there you are, that was quick.
Right, Dilly, thank you so much. Thank you. Can we have a round of applause for Dilly for his speech, please? Thank you very much. I'll ask the first question, then we'll go straight to our audience. My first question is this. You named this book The Culprit, or Culprits. There's no that. Or you've dropped the that. Similar to what they did with Facebook. It suggests that a crime has been committed, and a crime has been committed. But my first question to you would be this. If you open up the book, one of the first things you see is the 371 different ethnic groups that make up what's today as Nigeria. From your perspective, without the work of the culprits, without the criminal activity of the culprits, would those 371 ethnic groups be better off today as standalone entities as opposed to as parts of this mega conglomerate, amalgamated entity called Nigeria?
Yes, thank you for that question. I chose the title Culprits intentionally because Nigeria is a crime scene. And the biggest crime of all is the lumping together of 371 distinct, organic, ethnic groups and selling them the fiction that by virtue of us calling this area that you physically happen to be, to give it a name called Nigeria, you are one people. It's a bit like an African sitting and having a conference and then naming the whole of the European mainland Euroland, and you're all speaking our language, Yoruba, and all of a sudden you're just one people, simply by virtue of your skin colour.
I would have gone with white area, so that's like that. I was supposed to Euroland, but there we go. But yeah, sorry, please.
That is essentially the fundamentals of the crime scene. Whereas these were self-governing peoples. They had governance systems that worked for them. Given the needs of existence at that time, what they had worked for us. It was the interaction of cultures and experiences that now effectively dug up what was there. And part of what I'm seeking to achieve through this book, and with your help, we're going to spread the understanding, spread the lessons inside the book, is by exposing the root of the problem through the process of disseminating the understanding. The solution now becomes possible because you can't solve a problem until you understand it. And this book is a critical part of the process of getting not just Nigerians, but the world to understand what is wrong with that case.
I'm just going to re-emphasize the question, the 371 ethnic groups that make up today Nigeria, would they have been better off standing alone?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. Because
in 2024?
Yes. Okay. Because when it comes to governance, small is beautiful. Small is beautiful. The essence of a cancer is that the cell in its normal state is healthy, but when it outgrows its natural size, that's when it becomes destructive. And that applies also to democracy. In our early bird speakers club, there's no fraud, corruption. Why? Because we know each other. The essence of democracy is that you have direct knowledge of the persons that you are trusting and entrusting with your affairs. When that link is broken, because now it's no longer Whitefriars Club, it is the Club of Great Britain. That removes is the gap where corruption creeps in. And so the bigger the distance between the individual and his representative, I always say that your representative should live within striking distance of where you live. Because it's that local connection that underpins accountability.
Thank you, absolutely brilliant answer, thank you.
Yes, thank you. I had a question following on directly from that, really, and I'm sympathising totally with what you're saying about historic divisions and then ways they are brought together, even if not necessarily by choice. And it really goes back to the point I was making about humans. We're at once a prickly species. We have hostility, aggression, conflict and all that, but we also have a capacity for cooperation and communitas, and especially in the current crisis of the global climate crisis, we need. So what I was really going to ask you is, building on your experience of the Nigerian politics and Nigerian British experience, how are we going to create a world humanity solidarity? Sorry, that's not the perfect phrasing, but you know what I mean. How are we going to get together collectively, but building on all these separate collective paths, and without having a hierarchy of goodies and baddies and all the rest? How are we going to do it?
I think my suggestion would be this: that we share ideas and best practice. Because the baddies in charge, they love the chaos beneath. It's when our heads are knocked together that their powers increase. And they share information. They share precedents. And this is why this gathering is so wonderful, because we're able to compare notes and share experiences. Tony Blair, I despise that film, because he knew what Africa needed. I remember when he spoke at the Millennium Conference of the United Nations, and he said, "What shall we do for Africa?" You remember that? And he was talking in terms of aid. But what Africa needs is not financial aid, just share best practice. Because it was the same Tony Blair that was creating the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly for the Welsh and the Northern Ireland Assembly for the Northern Irish. So he understood the roots of the civil conflicts and civil crisis. And he was struggling to persuade me that he doesn't understand that those same solutions are the ones that ought to be implemented. Not even just in Nigeria, but right across the continent. Because it's the same underlying malady of the lumping of, whether it's Kenya, you're talking about the Kikuyu and the Luo, where you're talking about South Africa, it's the same. say, arbitrary arrangements, whereas nature shows us the way. It's the organic structures. It's the philosophy of good neighborliness, of live and let live. That is the only way forward. That the good ones amongst us must share experiences, show each other the way, not in a patronizing way, but simply comparing notes.
Yes, please, and then we'll come to our brother there.
Just to add on the subject of how can we all work together, I think there is still a narrative war to be won. What I mean by that is, even when you look at academic institutions, even the research that's out there, people are having their PhDs on, it's still fundamentally, some of them are still based on a very false narrative. Like somebody saying, Mungo Park discovered the River Niger, forgetting the River Niger was there, and people inhabited and lived there. But if you write, when we were young, if you say who discovered the River Niger, and you don't write Mungo Park, you fail the exams. You could not pass, because the narrative, so you succeed in your primary school by saying who discovered the River Niger, when actually there were communities that lived there. So there is a war of narrative to be won, to just deal with the point. That narrative war will be, because there's still information asymmetry, if I'm not mistaken. So the superior, people with superior knowledge feels that they have it. And that war is part of what we think at Fatherland. We're trying to increase the awareness, the neutrality and the equality of information and knowledge. That might be the beginning of it, just their thoughts, but that's what we're trying to do to deal with the narrative war. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman at the back over there, please, yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Dele, thank you very much for the invitation, and of course the book you've written. I look forward to reading it. I'm one of those lovers, Biafran survivor, sorry to say. I call myself an Ogweri, one who's the war did not destroy. So it's a great thing to be here today. Obviously, then you've done a lot of research. As I said, I'm looking forward to reading it. And the Berlin conference with failure engineering rebuilt in what we're suffering. I'm so grateful for someone like you who can actually research and dig out the facts. My headache is this. Is there enough history? Are we taking history seriously enough? In not just outside Nigeria, but also in countries like Nigeria and the whole of Africa to understand the root of all our problems. Because in order to address the failure engineering built in when those countries were set up, if you look in Africa, it's all boxes, isn't it? I mean, you might appreciate there's no organic nature to the actual boundaries, it's just small boxes and so on. So is there a way of expediting the history taught at school? Because we're going to need people to replace you and myself. The younger generation need to have this knowledge in order to build it up so that history becomes that important in helping Africans to appreciate the need to survive. As a Biafran, there's a common humanity which I understood during the war, because a white lady doctor came and felt my tummy to see if I had a shoko. And of course there was an air raid at the same time. So we all dived into the bush behind a tree, and I could see her from where I was hiding. She was the only person sitting, and the plane was going around terrorizing the village. So there's common humanity, those who stick their neck out to come and help. But I think Africans, the time has come for them to understand the history behind where we are. Thank you for your help.
Thank you.
The phrase that I like to use these days is each one teach one. Each one teach one. I learned a lot from the missionaries, the way they went about. 12 in number. And they transformed the whole world. And how did they do it? Simply by being missionaries, spreading the word. We can't wait for the states to take the responsibility, especially in Africa, where those that the system, the structure has put in power, they like overseers of the old slave plantations. Their job is to keep things as they are. So the responsibility then becomes to liberate ourselves, and the process of liberation is through education and teaching ourselves. So that's why we write history. That's why, as Professor Caulfield said, we have to take history very, very seriously. And it's the responsibility of...
It is the basis of the collective too. So all those teachers there, you're very, very pessimistic on Pan-Africanism. And it surprises me, but I've never really asked you why. So tonight's my night. Why? Why are you skeptical on everything that all of our greats agree is good for Africans or so, but you seem to think it's I don't know, how do you see it and why do you see it that way?
It goes back to the point that I made earlier, the problem of size. When I was speaking in terms of cells, the human cells and the cancerous cells. When the scale becomes too large, it becomes destructive.
But can I push back? I agree, in principle, with your, dare I say, libertarian perspective there. A united Africa, which is a dream of Pan-Africa, a united, strong and prosperous Africa, so by way of population, would still be smaller than China, would still be smaller than India. And I suppose the question to you would be that, do you think that a balkanized China or a balkanized India into say 50, 60 smaller states or so, sometimes having to compete with each other and then compete on the global stage at the exact same time, do you think that they would, let's say, those constituent mini Chinese states or mini Indian states, do you think they would be better for the people of China and India compared to what exists today? And it's proven to be quite prosperous as well.
The fundamental difference between China / India and Africa is this. China is, I believe, something like 90% Han Chinese. That is the anchor. You need an anchoring identity. Because once you have an anchoring identity, even Britain here is 70%, Professor Caulfield will correct me if I'm wrong, but something like 70% English. That is the anchoring identity. And when you have such an anchoring identity, it doesn't feel threatened by the other identities so much, and they can be magnanimous. So there's stability. India is something like 80% Hindu. I always remind people that India today is not even India under the Raj, the British Empire, because India today is minus Burma, Pakistan, Bangladesh. Just imagine if India still had Pakistan within it, Bangladesh within it. So, as in the human body, you just need internal stability. If you've got indigestion, and the problem of Africa is the indigestion of thousands of ethnic groups
who are 100% African, which would be the anchoring identity here. Because if you look at before we were we recognized, well, we were To a certain degree, we were Africans long before we were Nigerians or so. Although, don't get me wrong, it wasn't like our biggest priority in terms of identity. That was almost the imposition of colonial construct. It wasn't a colonial construct, but it was almost like the ideas of you're all Africans or so. It's fairly new, essentially, to us as African people. But it's fairly accepted a lot more than, say, I believe, or I'm wondering, would it be accepted much more than, say, the concept of, say, you're a Nigerian, which is just put parked out to the sky by some people who didn't really know us. But at least we recognise the continent. We call it Africa today, although it's quite weird that the letter C doesn't appear in most African alphabets, but it does appear after the word Africa. As opposed to us actually just really... So the Pan-Africanist dream is that we recognise ourselves as Africans, use that as the anchoring identity, and build from there. But you're still sceptical. Yeah.
For this reason, Europe, or the equivalent on a smaller scale, is the European identity. You cannot lump them. Brexit, what was Brexit all about?
English nationalism.
The idea that simply because they occupy a landmass and they have a skin colour, so therefore that is the basis of political unity, simply does not work. And Africa is on an even bigger scale in terms of skin colour alone does not make for a political identity. It distinguishes you from others, but it doesn't make you internally one. That's why the Chinese example is different. That is an anchoring. They have the same heroes, even though their spoken language is not completely mutually intelligible. Their written one is. India, as I've said, religion is the binding influence. What is the binding influence for Pan-Africans? Skin colour can't do it. Geographical proximity is not enough. And so I get the idea of unity, but unity comes at different levels. There's the social level. There's the doing business together at the financial level. But the hardest thing of all is when it comes to sharing power. Because that's when the threats are perceived. And then you have to have you need a governance structure where each ethnic group can have its own seat at the table. Rather than looking for that Superman or Superwoman who can be all things to all people. Even though they don't have the same language, they don't have the same heroes or even value system. So it just, all that's required is intelligent redesign. So I distinguish Africanism from Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism is a lofty idea of creating almost like a United States of Africa, and you have a powerful president that will run the whole show. Now, the United States of Nigeria has been a disaster. And the worst thing we could do is to inflict that, or scale it up to have the United States of Africa with a super powerful Mobutu or Idi Amin running the show.
Or DELE OGUN. So I would say strong disagree from me, strong disagree from Marcus Garvey, strong disagree from Malcolm X, Thomas Sankara, from Winnie Mandela, from you, Ben, also. But look, we agree to disagree to that. But I think this is going to be something we're going to discuss over the course of, as we go through the discussion about the Berlin Conference, CULPRITS, over the course of next year, a few years or so. There's a conference in Namibia, there's a conference coming up that you're all assembling in Nigeria right now. We will convert you in due time. There's a gentleman in the Arsenal top, so yeah, there we go. Oh, sorry, it wasn't him. So we've got about 10 minutes left. We're going to try and get out by 1:45, or just trying to try and wrap up by 1:45. Please, our brother in the lovely coat, yeah.
Can you hear me clearly? Yes. Right, DELE, thank you so much for educating me. The first time I met you, it was when we were talking about Fatherland Group. And I'm very happy you produced or you published this book called. But you know where I stand in relation to Nigeria. I've always maintained the same position. But you've got me to a point now where I can understand the orange union. One thing you said earlier was tracing a step back when you lost. I completely agree with that. Because when you don't know where you're going, what's the point going further? So we need to trace our step back. We can see from empirical evidence that Nigeria has its current standards. It's almost a misnomer. It's not working for the people within it. Like Brother Nelson said, I come from a place called Delta State. From
what are you calling?
No, Kwani, you see?
Okay.
Many people haven't heard of us, but we're very proud, independent, part of that Delta State. Now, geographically, we're close to the Benin Kingdom, but they never, in all these hundreds of years, have lived alongside the subdominators. Our language is more Igbo. So, how do we go back to where we were, given that Nigeria currently exists? Is to maintain and respect each other's differences. You see, we lived alongside the Benin Kingdom and never sought to dominate us. And we spoke a language, and if I was talking to an Igbo man today, he would understand me. Likewise, we understand the Igbo. So, I think Nigerians need to be educated that it doesn't have to be the way it currently is, and we can find ourselves back to where we were before we were colonized. So that's, thank you very much for speaking.
Thank you. I will take a question from our sister sat in front. So we've got about 6 minutes left, so we just want to we'll burn through 6 minutes left in the Q&A. Please, sister, welcome.
Thanks. I just want to come back very briefly to the ideas of the professor, and I think a couple of people already mentioned about the importance of sharing and history, and I can't quite remember the term you used, Professor, but it's about sharing and sharing the knowledge and the history and the impact of a detailed, accurate version of history as we know it. I particularly know that the history that I was reading and hearing when I was growing up was not accurate. You know, the African story, the independence, and the wings of Africa, and change, and all of that was not accurate. And I'm now beginning to see more accurate details. I mean, when Winston Churchill passed away recently, we got lots of new information that people didn't know before. When not passed away, the archives were released and so on. So basically, my point is the importance of sharing accurate, detailed information, not just to us who are a bit of a converted group, because we know, we search, we've been reading Dele's books and other sources of history, but to the younger generation. And I think the speaker over there touched about that, how we disseminate this history, which is more accurate and which is more relevant to today's world. I recently got the book that DELE wrote about when we broke into Africa, and I've made sure my nephews and nieces and family friends have read it. And even me as an adult, I found lots of new information there that I hadn't come across before. So although I haven't read the culprits, it's going to be on my Christmas break reading list, I'm sure there will be lots of information there about these characters that the young and upcoming generation need to know about. Obviously, you know, in a child-friendly way, without all the silk, satin, CG details perhaps, shared with them. But I just want to stress the importance of that happening, and perhaps maybe Dele, you can think of a book, a younger version, like When Are You Book into Africa, with these characters in it. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you both for your comments. As I've said, there's a narrative, as Tim said, there's a narrative war, the narrative that we grew up on, and the new narrative, because now we have access to the information, and we have those who can write a fresh version of the history. And in answer to Samson's point, as I said before, it's the way forward is the way back. it's a question now of, like missionaries, spreading the knowledge. What looks impossible, you can imagine, think again, think back, 12 of them. 12 of them. If they could see us now, what they did, just 12 in number, it will have seemed impossible. But it's only impossible until it's done. And so therefore, it's just a question of sharing the knowledge, spreading the knowledge, helping others to understand our situation. That's essentially what the book is about. That's why, as I said, it's very much directed to our non-African friends, so they can understand the true situation of Africa. And when we say we need to take a few steps back in order to go forward, they can support us in that exercise. But the reality is this: difference is natural. And sometimes it works better when we acknowledge the difference. If we deny it and suppress it, that is where oppression stems from. Since Tony Blair created the Northern Ireland Assembly, we have had less issues with the IRA, have we not? It was simply responding to their desire to control their own affairs. It wasn't breakup. I think people tend to think that the only solution and that what's being proposed is breakup. No. The value of union is understood. But there are limits to political union, because everyone wants the responsibility of self-determination. And if in a structure like Nigeria with 371 ethnic groups, we're in a situation now where only, I would say, 2.5 ethnic groups can ever be president of that country. Some would never get there. They stay in the shadows permanently. The big two, Hausa, more likely Fulani, because the Hausa don't really get there. The Kanuri, and Muslim Yoruba, because the Christian Yoruba is getting to the point where they can't get there. So what's being proposed is understand the problem, re-engineer a solution that allows us to be good neighbors. And by being good neighbors, on the street, you have your own house, you paint it the colours that you want, according to your value systems, rather than say we must all live together in some open plan arrangement because we want to be together. Take it back to families. Both parents, same mother, same father. It doesn't make you identical. You've got to recognize the difference. My two sisters are there. And boy, we used to argue when we were younger. And we argue even more. We're older. Because the reality is that even though you're of the same blood, doesn't mean that your value systems and your aspirations and what's important to you is going to be identical. So good governance requires that we show respect to diversity, to acknowledge it and don't pretend that it does not exist. And the real core point, and I'll end on this point, is this. Africans should stop trying to outdo everybody else, because the rest of the world structures their governance systems in a way that recognizes difference. That's what Tony Blair did. He listened, and we must listen. But this is all too serious. I want a party. I want a DJ too.
Sorry, I'll just say this. Sorry, can I just ask us to put our hands and our hearts together? I'm just going to say a couple of final words. Identity and development ostrich nation and golden jubilee, the law, the lawyers and the lawless, a fatherless people, Oyinbo came to Africa, a slave ship called Jesus, the life and times of Mrs. Evelyn Ene, and now the culprits, or culprits. Ladies and gentlemen, DELE OGUN.